I was not looking for company the night the storm came down like judgment. Winter had been working on the valley for weeks, sanding the color off everything, putting a bite into iron and bone. You can measure a man by what he tends after sundown. I tended chores that have no end, cracked leather, stiff hinges, a gelding with a stubborn cough, work you do so you do not have to think about the work inside your ribs. The sky had gone the color of old tin. The wind pushed through the cottonwoods and made a hymn of their emptiness. I saddled up only because I feared the freight car would ice over, and the last feed sacks I had on order would be ruined. The station sat 3 crooked miles from my place, a little platform built out of the railroad's gratitude and our town's hope. They said the county would fill once the line went through. They always say that. Some years it is the railroad people put their faith in. Some years it is raining. I had lost the habit of faith, but I had the habit of seeing a thing to its end. The road was already losing itself beneath the snow. It moved sideways, not down, a white that did not fall so much as hunt. The horse lowered his head and pushed. I leaned into the weather and let it peel the heat off me. I thought of nothing particular. That is the one gift of a hard winter. It washes the mind clean of every color but one. You drift into that wide, pale room and there is almost peace. When the cold burns long enough, you stop remembering the rest. The station house loomed up with no warning, a dark block, roof line hunched against the wind. The last day train had gone early, the telegraph shut down, the agent's lamp snuffed. I tied off at the lee side and took the lantern I keep in the saddlebag. The glass rattled, the flame bent and fret but held. I walked the platform and listened, the creak of boards, the angry talk of storm. The world had been stripped to element and bone. I almost missed her. She lay in the lee of the freight car, where the drift gathered and the wind lost some teeth. The lantern swung once, twice, and the light threw her shape at me. A small confusion of coat and hair and a single hand pale as if made of spill moon. At first I thought she was one of those scare bundles boys throw together to spook each other, some old coat over feed sack. Then the hand moved. Not much. It twitched like a foal testing the world. I went down hard enough to jar my teeth, one knee in the drift, the other against iron that stole heat faster than any preacher takes comfort. I touched her shoulder and felt the stiffness of a body losing its terms with itself. "Ma'am," I said, because that is a word that carries better than prayer where I come from. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her breath answered in a small, ragged way, like a tired bird under brush. She had no hat. Her hair was the color winter keeps to itself just before dawn, neither gold nor brown, something in between that catches what light there is and makes do. Snow had crusted along her lashes. Her mouth was blue at the edges, but there was a stubborn line there, the shape a person makes when they've been arguing with the day and will not yield. There was a nursing satchel near her elbow, leather worn to a dull shine, buckles cheap but honest. I have seen that kind of bag at field tents and charity kitchens and the back benches of church halls. It belongs to people who do not get to go home early. "I've got you," I told her. The words came out quiet. A man finds his voice again when he needs to hand it to someone else. I worked my coat loose and wrapped it around her. The wind growled at the theft. I felt clumsy as a boy. She weighed less than she should, and more than I wanted. Frost will put stones inside a body fast. I got her up against my chest and stood, and the world reeled, and for a breath the lantern and the snow and the sky changed places with the black that waits behind the eyes. Then everything steadied, and the work was plain. Horse, saddle, home. The mount showed the kind of sense an animal earns by standing alongside a man's bad choices. He braced while I got her across the saddle before me, cradled with one arm, reins in the other. I tied the satchel to the horn. The storm shoved us off the platform and into a whiteness that did not want to be parted. The horse went by memory and stubborn faith. I went by counting fences and the taste of the wind. She went by whatever thread she had left. I could feel her breath trying to learn the shape of mine. I spoke to keep us both in the world. I told her the horse's name and the way he refuses to accept that apples are not for him. I told her about a creek that dries up most summers and then comes back mean in October, cutting the banks new. I told her about a little tree that used to stand outside my kitchen window, used to. I did not say the name that wanted saying. Names wake ghosts, and I did not need that weather inside the weather. She answered once with a sound I will not forget, not a word. A sort of sigh that said she was getting pulled toward a place and did not want it. I told her to fight. I told her I had coffee and a stove and a quilt that had seen better nights than it has left. A man should lie if the lie keeps somebody breathing. The truth was, coffee gone to grounds twice over, a stove that sulked, and a quilt that held memory like a burr. We made the yard by feel. The fence post there is split from a summer lightning strike, and the horse always gives it an extra inch. The porch steps knew my weight and complained. I got the door shouldered open, and the cold came in like a band of riders. I took the brunt and pushed them back out with my own heat, which is to say, I shut the door and leaned against it until my hands could decide to move again. I made the fire first. You do not put a body on a cold bed. That is a cruelty dressed as care. Wood, kindling. The match struck along the brick. The flare and the little prayer a man makes to flame when he has nothing else to ask. I fed it slow. I let the iron belly of the stove take the light and give it back as heat. Then I went to her. I worked her coat open and found the layers beneath. The skin at her wrists was unmarked by ring or ink. The nails were clipped square. A nurse's habit. There were scars, thin and tidy, on the back of one hand. A person doesn't get those from sewing. She had a mended place at the elbow where cloth in someone's time had agreed to try again. I took that as permission to keep trying. I rubbed her hands with a rag warmed at the stove. I did not let the heat lie on her too heavy. That is another cruelty men commit when they mean well. I talked while I worked, told her what I was doing in plain words, so she could come back to them later and see there was no harm meant. When I got as far as her feet, I found boots one size too big with paper stuffed in the toes. I have worn that kind of truth. It makes a certain shape on the sole. The kettle took its time. So did she. When the steam finally ghosted the wick light, I brewed coffee thin enough to see morning through and sweetened it with the last of the canned milk. I tipped a little past her lips. Some ran down her chin, and I wiped it away with the corner of a towel I keep for gentler chores than the ones I am known for. She swallowed. That small work looked like a climb up a hill. Later, when the room had learned how to be warm again, and the coats were draped over chair backs like tired riders, and the horse had his own heat in the shed, She opened her eyes. They were not the color poets waste ink on. They were the blue of a river stone you pick up without meaning to, because it sits there wanting a hand. She looked at me without flinch or alarm. She looked at the stove, the door, the window, the nails in the window frame where a curtain used to hang. People trained to save lives inventory a space first. It is how they love. "You're safe," I said. The words felt clumsy in my mouth like new boots. "Name's Clay. Clay Bennett. You got caught by the storm." She worked her mouth once, twice, until it remembered the shape of speech. "Nora," she said, voice roughened by too much cold and too much road. "Nora Brennan." She tried to sit up. The quilt argued. The room swayed on her. She settled back into what the night would allow. "I'm a nurse." "I figured." I nodded toward the satchel by the chair. "You kept hold of that even when the drift had you halfway under. Some folks hold on to money that way. Some hold on to hate. If a person's gonna clutch something, a bag like that seems a fine choice." Her mouth tried on a smile, but found it too heavy for the moment. "Thank you," she said. The words carried more freight than the station would ever see. I put another stick of wood on the fire and watched the sparks climb and give up. I felt the old ache move inside my chest and make itself a seat by the door like it always does. Loss learns a house better than any stray. But there was something else in the room now, something that did not ask or argue, just a quiet question the night kept setting between us like a plate. "You can rest," I said. "There's time. The storm's got itself a long sermon to preach. We'll listen and wait it out. That's all the work for now." She closed her eyes. The wind went on with its old stories, but I heard them different. The stove ticked and sighed. The horse shifted in the shed and stamped once, a sound like a punctuation mark on a sentence I did not know how to finish. I sat in the rocker and laid the Simon rope across my thigh and did not touch it. I have learned there are kinds of waiting that mend a man better than sleep. When she slept deep enough that the little furrow between her brows smoothed out, I let my own head tip back. I did not pray. I listened to the firework and the storm work and the place where the two of us had been set down to work on each other. Somewhere past the edge of the light, the apple seeds I had pressed into the yard last fall lay under the snow, thinking whatever it is seeds think. I thought about how some winters end not with spring, but with a door opening and somebody stepping through. I have seen men saved by a rope, by a horse, by a clean shot in a bad moment. I had never considered a person could be saved by a voice barely strong enough to say her own name. Morning came slow, the way a cautious animal noses from brush. I woke to the small sounds of a room, remembering it belonged to people. The stove ticked as if it were counting. The kettle breathed. Wind worked at the seams of the house, but with less fury, like it had argued itself hoarse and would now settle for grumbling. For a time, I kept my eyes closed and let the warmth collect along my cheekbones and make me a promise it might not keep. When I opened them, she was still there, the quilt pulled to her collarbone, the color not yet back, but thinking about it. I brewed coffee that had no business calling itself coffee, poured it into the cracked mug with the blue ring. I set another cup near the fire for her and let it cool into something she could manage. She stirred, and the sheet of quiet that lay between us folded itself into smaller pieces. I have known men who rise from a bad night like they just walked out of a river, ready to laugh and lie and shake the water off. She rose like a patient step on a porch that has seen storms, careful in the joints, grateful without saying. Easy, I told her. There's kindness in sitting still. She tested the word kindness like a foreign coin. I brought the cup. She took it with both hands, steady with effort, careful the way a person holds good news too early in the day. She drank in little slips, eyes closing against the heat. I watched the color, think better of its absence, and return to her mouth, her cheeks, the soft map of her throat. You can tell a lot about a life by the way a person receives warmth. Some make a show of refusing it. Some pull it into themselves like an apology they do not deserve. Nora accepted it as if she understood the cost it exacted from the woodpile and the man who cut it, and would find a way to pay back both. Nasha. She looked around the room again, slower this time, and I could see the ledger she kept in her head, add columns and notes. The shelf by the window carried a row of jars the color of old honey, some with beans, some with flour. The nail where a curtain used to hang had nothing to shoulder. The chair with the split rung had a strip of old belt binding it. The world leaves fingerprints. Mine were all over this place. You live alone, she said, not quite a question. I practice it, I answered. Some days I do it well. She nodded, not to judge, just to think. Then she looked at her satchel, which I had set upright, like a quiet animal by the rocker. May I, she asked, and be wrong of me to say no. She shifted, sat forward slow, reached for the bag with a tenderness that made something in me sit up. She opened the buckles. Inside she had her tools and her trade folded neat. A roll of bandage, a tin of salve, a handful of glass bottles with labels written in the patient hand of somebody taught by war and kept honest by scarcity. She touched each as if taking attendance. When she was satisfied, she closed the buckles and let the satchel rest again. It seemed to rest easier because she had. You were heading somewhere, I said. She took a breath that asked for patience from her ribs. I had a letter, a widow, in the northern valley with a sick child. The snow came faster than the timetable promised. The agent said there'd be a second freight to carry mail and such. I thought I'd hitch and ride to the road, meet a ranch hand with a sled. That was the plan. She studied the steam rising off the cup, and a shape like humor crossed her face. I've noticed plans talk loud before a storm. Chores do the same, I said. Only difference is chores make a better liar. That got the ghost of a smile to stay a little longer. She drank again, then worked at the edge of the quilt with her thumb and forefinger the way people do when they are thinking old thoughts. I gave her that quiet. I filled it with work. I split 3 short lengths, raked ash, eased the draft. Then I hefted the bucket and stepped into the lean-to where the barrel caught melt and roof drip. The air outside bit, but did not break skin. Light was considering breaking through, a pale smear behind traveling cloud. The yard was the kind that keeps a man anchored even when he's trying to drift. Fence line staggered but true, shed door patched in 3 places, a hitch post that remembered better horses. I looked at the place where the little apple I had planted last fall slept under its blanket of white. I had set that twig in the ground like a dare to myself. You do not plant if you do not intend to stay. Maybe I had intended without admitting. Maybe the seed knew more than I did. When I came back in, she had her head tilted, as if listening to a far thing. I know that tilt. It belongs to folks who measure a day by heartbeats, not clocks. She tried to stand. I set the bucket down and crossed to her before intention turned to regret. Not yet, I said. The floor is a long country right now. It can wait. I hate lying still, she said. The words carried more weight than they should, like a sentence spoken to a courtroom that lives inside a person. I know the feeling, I said. I also know the price of standing too soon. She let herself sink back and breathed through the stubborn. After a spell, she said, "Who was she?" No name had been spoken. No photograph sat on the mantel. Loss, however, leaves a certain shape in the air, the way a chair does when someone stands, and you can still see the outline of them in the cushion. I sat in the rocker because the truth asks for a seat. "Sarah," I said. The syllables moved through the room slow, careful, as if they were trying not to wake anything. "She died with the child. 2 winters ago. The doctor came late. Snow closed the north road. We were not ready either way." Nora's hand, still under the quilt, gripped its edge until the knuckles paled. "I'm sorry," she said, and made the words sound like work she meant to do. "Not a thing said, so silence will leave you be." "It was a good love," I said. "That is its own mercy and its own trouble. A man can live a long time in the shade of something that kind." I let the rocker find its slow arc. "I keep expecting the room to hand me back what I lost, like a decent neighbor would. Rooms are not neighbors." She looked toward the window, which held only the thought of winter. "I worked a field station near the big river," she said, voice leveled by memory. "We had a bell. I swear some nights I can still hear it. It meant a wagon was coming, or a train, or a gurney from the city. I learned to run before the bell finished ringing. After a while I woke to it when it was not there. That kind of sound lives under other sounds." I nodded. "There's a fence post in my yard split by lightning. I hear it cracking in fair weather. We carry the weather we survived." She was quiet a long spell after that. I could feel the shift in the room, the way you can tell when an animal that's been watching you decides you mean no harm. She eased the quilt back an inch, then another. "I need to see your hands," she said. "You said the gelding had a cough. If you are going out to the shed, you will do it anyway. Let me make sure the skin will not split when you take hold of a rope." I offered them. She took them like a person receives a tool they respect, turning them a little toward the light. Her touch was practical, with a hum under it that might have been kindness had it been louder. She examined the web between thumb and forefinger where cold makes its first argument. She leaned closer. I could smell clean wool, winter air, a note of pine tar from the satchel handle. "You've kept them whole," she said, "and that is a kind of discipline, or a kind of stubborn." "Both might," I said. She nodded toward the shelf. "There's a tin in my bag, camphor and fat rendered clean. Warm a little and rub into the joints, the thin places. I can do it, or you can. Either way, it is a good bargain against the next day's work." "I'll make the trade," I said. She drew a breath that cost less than the one before it. "And the widow," she added, remembering her letter the way a rider touches the reins, even in sleep. "How far to the northern valley from here?" "A day in good weather. 2 in weather that can't choose. With this storm, as many as the storm decides." A shadow crossed her face. Not fear, not guilt. Something older that belongs to people who count their victories in inches. "We will write a note," she said at last. "You can write it to the station when the tracks wake up. The agent will know another line that carries north, or a boy who knows a back trail. Work wants an answer even when the first is no." There it was again. The way she arranged the world inside a single room so it would not fall on us later. I stood, took the satchel, found the tin, warmed a little in a spoon near the stove. She watched me do it and let me be taught without calling it teaching. When I rubbed the salve into the places she named, the heat traveled through skin into bone in a slow, honest way. I have felt more lavish comforts, none felt as deserved. By noon the light had found its width and put a shine on the snow, like a promise too bright to trust. The wind went quiet, but the clouds still lay heavy, like cattle that mean to rise when the dog's back is turned. I stepped out to the shed with a blanket and an extra measure of oats, checked the horse, set my hand to his neck until he told me he remembered son. When I came back in, she had managed to sit at the edge of the bed, feet to the floor, hands braced to either side of her like she was holding down a map. She looked up as if she had been waiting to be fetched. "Let's see about that window," she said, nodding at the cracked pane and the draft I had learned to pretend was not there. "If we fix what's shivering, maybe the room won't have to work so hard to be kind." I gathered a board, a hammer, a handful of nails left over from other arguments with weather. She held the lamp steady while I set the patch. We did not talk much. The sound of the nails made its simple case against the day. The patch went on ugly and true, like most of my solutions. When the last nail set, the draft dropped away enough to make us both look at each other, the way people do when the ache in a tooth stops all at once. We ate what the pantry admitted. A tin of peaches, kept for better news, a heel of bread toasted on the stove lid, coffee that had learned patience. She thanked the peaches with a quiet that would have made the man who canned them stand a little taller. I washed the cups and set them upside down on the rag. She folded the rag when it dried and tucked it where it would be found again. That is how two strangers become less strange. Outside, the afternoon got on with its long, slow business. Inside, we let our own business be small and careful and true. Toward dusk, she said, "Tell me about that tree you mentioned." I told her where I'd planted it, how I had pressed the soil down with my boot, how the ground had held the print until the first real freeze. I told her I had no right to ask it to live here, and yet had asked just the same. She said, "Well, sometimes I think the miracle is not that seeds live, but that people keep trying to make a place where they can." We sat with that. The stove hummed its low hymn. The patched window went dull with early dark. I felt a quiet opening in me that was not the absence of pain, but the presence of something else. Maybe it was the simplest kind of hope, the kind that does not speak its name yet. I have watched calves wobble to stand and thought, there now, you are on your way. I heard that same thought in the room, as if the house itself had set hooves under it and meant to rise. The third day of the storm came with a quiet that did not trust itself. Snow still pressed against the windows, but the wind had gone off to argue elsewhere. The light through the glass had the color of tin washed in milk, thin but honest. I woke before her again. Old habits die slower than people. I stoked the stove, brewed the kind of coffee that keeps a man from talking too much, and stood by the window watching the air hold its breath. You can tell when a storm is deciding whether it's done with you. It takes on that watchful stillness of a gambler who hasn't counted his coins yet. She stirred under the quilt, sighed once, the sound small and round as a pebble dropped in a well. I turned, and then she opened her eyes like she had been following me in a dream and just caught up. "Still here, Max?" I said. "For now," she answered, voice rasped but steadier. "And you?" "I've been here longer than I ought," I said, and poured her a cup that had cooled enough for her fingers. The day settled into that slow rhythm storms allow. She managed to sit by the stove, a chair pulled close enough that the heat touched her knees. I mended tack by the door, the smell of oil and leather mixing with coffee. Between us lay the small space where strangers turn into companions, neither of us in a hurry to cross it, but both aware it was shrinking. She watched me work for a while, eyes thoughtful. "You handle the leather like you're trying not to hurt it," she said. "Only thing left that listens," I answered, "and it does what it's told without needing a reason." She smiled a little, and the smile stayed. "You don't talk like the other ranchers I've met. Maybe they've had better company, or less time to think." "Thinking's a habit like any other," I said. "Some men chew tobacco. I'll chew at my own head." She nodded, folded her hands in her lap. "In the wards, when nights stretch long, we talk about men like you, the ones who live too far from noise. We wondered if you all turned wild or holy." "Neither sticks," I said. "Mostly you just turn quiet." The wind found a loose shutter and rattled it for a punctuation. She sipped the coffee and let the warmth paint her cheeks. "Quiet isn't the same as peace," she said. "No," I agreed. "Quiet just means the hurt learned its manners." The look she gave me then was not pity. It was the look one wounded thing gives another when they realize the shape of their scars match. "You sound like a man who's been carrying too much alone," she said. "That so?" "Yes." I considered the fire before answering. "Maybe, but carrying's easier than setting it down and watching where it rolls." That got her to laugh once, soft and broken like an old hinge freeing up. That might be true. After that, we let the silence stretch, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind that grows roots between two chairs. I patched the cinched strap. She folded bandages from a bolt of cloth she'd found in her bag. The room filled with small, honest noises, thread through linen, knife scraping old wax, the breath of two people not sure what to say and not needing to. By afternoon, the sky decided on gray. I stepped outside to shovel the drift from the door and found the world remade. The yard was a single sheet, all fences buried except for the stubborn tops of posts. My breath rose and vanished in a single sigh. Somewhere a crow argued with the emptiness. I thought about what it meant to be lost in that much white. How easy it would have been not to find her. How thin the line between a story and a grave. When I came back in, she had stood and was walking slow along the wall, one hand trailing over the boards to steady herself. I watched her trace the grooves in the wood like she was reading the room by touch. "Getting my legs back," she said, "feels like waking up from a long sermon." "Take your time," I said. "The day ain't going anywhere." She paused near the window, looking out at the smooth, featureless distance. "There's a kind of beauty in it," she said, "the sort that hurts to look at." "There's a lot of that out here, I said. You stare too long, and it starts talking back. She turned toward me. Does it talk to you? Some days, I said. Usually says things I already know. That earned another small smile, the kind that settles deeper than laughter. She came back to the stove and sank into the chair again. I used to think the land was merciful, she said. You patch a wound, and it closes. You plant, it grows. But out here, everything's got to fight for permission. Mercy's a word preachers use when they run out of luck, I said. Out here, you take what the sky gives and say thank you, even if it's a beating. She looked down at her hands, turning them palm up as if reading an old message. I thought leaving the city would make things simpler. Fewer people, fewer ghosts. I studied her for a moment. Ghosts don't count by towns, I said. They ride the same horse you do. Just sit behind and whisper when you slow down. Her shoulders eased then, and she looked at me the way a person does when the world has just admitted a truth they already felt. And how long have yours been riding? She asked. 2 winters, I said. Some days I forget the weight. Some days I feed it breakfast. She didn't answer right away. The fire settled, and the sound of the wind softened into breath. I lost someone too, she said finally. War took him. Or maybe it was the fever after. I stopped keeping the difference straight. What was his name? Daniel, she said, and the word trembled once, then steadied. He was kind. He laughed easy. I thought we built a life after all the noise ended. Turns out the noise doesn't end. It just changes rooms. I nodded. Yeah, it moves house. Same as a drifter. Finds a new roof to leak under. She stared into the fire, eyes wet but calm. I tried to keep helping people after he died. Thought if I saved enough others it might even things out, but you can't make a scale hold something that isn't there. No, I said quietly, but you can build a table sturdy enough to set the scale on. Sometimes that's the work. She looked at me, then down again, and the corner of her mouth lifted just enough to let a breath out that might have been the first honest one of the day. You talk like a preacher who stopped believing. I reckon preachers talk like cowboys who never owned land, I said. She laughed again, low, and the sound filled the room like fresh air. The storm could have come back right then and it wouldn't have mattered. For a little while, there was weather inside, worth standing in. Evening crept over us without asking. I fixed a stew from beans and salt pork, and we ate without hurry, each spoonful a small victory. She told me about the hospital trains, the ones where the lamp swung and you learned to tie a knot one-handed because the other was busy holding someone's hope together. I listened. Sometimes I asked, and then, just to keep her talking. When she finished, she stared at the spoon in her hand and said, "It's strange. You can hold so much suffering and still find a way to keep going." "Maybe because stopping takes more courage than we've got," I said. She shook her head. "No, I think it's because we keep hoping someone will come along and remind us we're still human." "Didn't think that was still my job," I said. "Maybe it's everyone's," she said softly. Outside, the light left the sky. The room filled with that gentle blue that sits between day and night, where everything holds its breath before choosing a side. She leaned back in the chair, eyes heavy. I cleared the dishes, poured her a small cup of warm milk left from the can, set it beside her, She drank without speaking. When I turned down the lamp, she whispered, "Huma, thank you for finding me." I thought about what to say, but the right words never come when they should. So I just said, "We were both out there. I just happened to be looking in your direction." She smiled once, tired and honest, then slept. I sat a while longer, watching the fire shrink and the shadows lengthen. The storm had eased, but something else had taken its place. A quiet that wasn't empty anymore. It had shape now. Weight, the kind that presses against a man's chest not to crush it, but to remind it it's still there. Morning opened its eyes, slow and golden, a shy sun filtering through the seams of the patched window. I stepped outside and found the world hushed under its new skin. The storm had done what storms do. It cleaned the slate and left the living to figure out what to write next. The air bit, but it was clean, and I could smell cedar and smoke and something sweet I hadn't noticed in months. Maybe hope has a scent when the cold's done chasing it. The yard looked smaller in the snow's embrace. The shed leaned against the light like an old man remembering work. The apple tree's thin branch poked through the drift, a finger raised at heaven. I brushed the snow off it, careful as if it could feel. "You made it," I said. My breath hung between us, wide and certain. When I went back inside, she was sitting up proper, blanket around her shoulders, hair loose down her back like a story unrolled. The fire painted her cheekbones in rose. She was reading a scrap of newspaper I'd left on the table, something months old about a cattle auction no one came to. "Looks like the storm gave us a day off," I said. She folded the paper, smiled small. "The world looks different when it stops trying to kill you." "That it does." I poured us coffee. She took hers with both hands, eyes following the steam as though it might carry her back to some kinder season. "You ever wonder," she said, "how many lives are hidden under snow like this? How many didn't find their way home?" "I do," I said, and then I tell myself I can't dig up every ghost or I'll never sleep. She nodded, set the cup down, and looked at me with a kind of brave sadness. "You lost her in a storm too, didn't you?" I let the question sit a while. "Same kind of storm, different kind of cruelty. The doctor was caught past the ridge. The wind closed the world behind him. I buried her when the thaw came, buried the boy next to her. Didn't aim the cross." Her eyes didn't flinch. "I'm sorry," she said again, this time like she was saying it to the world, not just to me. "You must have hated the snow for a long time." "I did. Still do sometimes, but it's the thing that reminds me she was real. You don't hate what you never loved." She didn't answer, just looked out the window. The light caught her profile, and I saw a woman not broken, but hollowed, like a shell that still hums the sound of what once lived inside it. After breakfast, I offered her my coat and a hand. "Come on," I said. "You ought to see how a storm leaves its mark." She hesitated, then took my arm, the first real weight of her hand in mine. We stepped outside. The sun cut bright against the snow, and the world looked too clean for all it had done. She blinked against it, smiling with her eyes closed. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "That's the trick of it," I said. "It'll try to kill you one day and make you thank it the next." She laughed quietly, and the sound made the cold retreat. We walked slow around the yard, the snow creaking under our boots like an old floor. She pointed to the fence, where the wind had carved long curling ridges. "It's like waves," she said, frozen in the middle of their roar. Sometimes I think the sea and the snow share a heart, I said, just different tempers. When she shivered, I led her back inside, the warmth wrapping around us like forgiveness. That afternoon, she asked if she could tidy up the table, and I let her. Watching her move about the room felt like watching someone knit life back into wood and air. She hummed a tune low and steady, the kind that keeps your hands from shaking. The sound settled deep in the house and me. I mended a boot, or pretended to, mostly just listening. When she finished, she looked up. "You should eat more," she said. "You're all bone and guilt." I grinned. "That's the cowboy diet." "I'll fix it then," she said. "Every patient needs better medicine than that." She set about cooking what little we had left. A handful of beans, a sliver of pork, a pinch of salt. It smelled like something bigger than itself. When she handed me a bowl, I almost felt like a man with a home again. "You cook like you mean it," I said. "I do," she said, and looked right at me. "There's healing in the small things. You feed someone, you remind them they're supposed to stay." We ate slow. Outside, the snow began to whisper down again, soft as forgiveness. Later, while the lamps burned low, I found her sitting by the fire, her fingers tracing the rim of her empty cup. "You've been kind," she said. "I know, and I keep wondering if you ever let yourself be." "Kind to myself?" I asked. "Yes. I don't know how, man," I said. "Out here you start counting days instead of reasons." "You saved me," she said. "Maybe that's a start." I wanted to tell her I didn't save her, that the storm had simply spared us both, but the words felt too small against the look she gave me. So I said nothing. That night, she dreamed, restless and low, murmuring names I didn't know. I sat by the fire again, same as the first night, and let her voice thread through the dark. The house listened with me. There are kinds of prayer you don't have to understand to join in. Toward dawn, she quieted. The snow outside stopped pretending to fall and simply rested. I watched her breathing even out. Her face softened again, and thought maybe the Lord or luck or something older had decided we both had enough punishment for a while. I lay down on the floor near the stove, let the heat touch my back, and stared at the ceiling. The boards were dark with age and smoke. Between them, light leaked from the cracks of a world that still existed beyond this small room. I closed my eyes and imagined Sarah's face fading into Nora's, one memory stitching itself into another, not in betrayal, but in mercy. The wind sighed once more through the chimney, as if clearing its throat before silence, and for the first time in a long time, I slept through the morning. When I woke, she was already at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair tied back with a ribbon she'd found in the drawer I never opened. The air smelled of biscuits and coffee. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming, that I'd stepped backward into a morning long gone, one where Sarah hummed and the house answered her. Then Nora turned, and it was another woman, another Mercy, standing in the same light. "You sleep heavy," she said. "I was half afraid you'd frozen to the floor." "I might have, if you hadn't made the place smell like heaven," she laughed. "Heaven's short on biscuits, I reckon. Eat while they're warm." We sat across from each other, elbows on the table, steam curling between us. The biscuits were rough but good, the kind that crumble honest in your hands. She watched me take the first bite like it was a test. Better than coffee grounds, I said. I've had worse reviews. We ate in that easy quiet that only comes when both folks have seen enough hunger. Afterward, she looked out the window, the snow bright enough to hurt. The road will clear soon, she said. You'll want to ride into town. Maybe, I said, but the town can wait. The world's gotten enough folks rushing it along. She smiled a little. I still need to send that letter to the widow. Tell her I'm alive, even if I'm late. I'll take it when the track opens, I said. Be a couple days yet. The drifts are high near the cut. She nodded, quiet again. I could see the thought working behind her eyes, the pull between duty and rest. Some people don't know how to be still without feeling guilty. I used to think that was a woman's curse. Now I know it's just a human one. We spent the next hours working side by side. I split wood out back, each swing cutting through more than pine. She cleaned the shelves, humming that low tune again, some hymn from a hospital ward or a life I'd never know. By midday, the place looked like it remembered what living was for. Later she came out to where I was stacking logs. The sun had climbed higher, setting diamonds loose across the snow. She shielded her eyes and said, You could hire help, you know. No need to do everything alone. I've tried, I said, and they never stay. Why? I expect too little conversation, I said, and too much work. That made her laugh again, and it did me more good than any sermon ever did. We walked the fence line after that, slow steps so she could keep her footing. The air had the taste of thaw, that first hint of water beneath the ice. She looked at the hills, the way they folded into one another, soft and endless. I've been to cities where the streets never stop talking, she said, but I never heard anything that sounded this alive. It's quiet that tells you you're not alone, I said. Noise just hides it better. We stopped by the creek bed. It was frozen near solid, but a thin runnel of water still whispered beneath. She crouched to listen, fingers pressed to the ice. It's still moving, she said. Always does, I said, even when you can't see it. Just needs time to find its way. She looked up at me then, her eyes blue as that hidden current. That's hope, isn't it? Or habit, I said. Hard to tell them apart most days. She smiled, but it faltered. I thought I'd forgotten what it felt like to talk with someone without trying to fix them. Maybe we're both still learning, I said. She reached out and touched the sleeve of my coat, just a brush of fingers against wool. Maybe we are. We walked back as a light began to fold itself into gold. The house waited for us, warm and simple. She built the fire higher. I mended a saddle strap that didn't need mending. Evening settled, and we both pretended not to notice how close it had gotten. After supper, she took out her satchel and laid her instruments on the table, each one gleaming in the lamplight. I want to earn my keep, she said. If you've got wounds worth tending, now's the time. I laughed. You mean apart from the ones you can't see? Those take longer, she said, but I've got patience. I held out my hand. She cleaned a small cut near my knuckle where a splinter had found its mark. Worked in silence, her touch steady. There, she said, that should heal clean. Everything does, given the chance, I asked. She looked at me, serious now. Not everything, but enough to keep us trying. The clock on the wall ticked slow. Outside, the wind was gentler than it had been in weeks. I poured her a little whiskey I kept for cold nights. She hesitated, then took it. For the ache, I said. To the ache, she answered, and we drank. When she set the glass down, she asked, Do you ever talk to her, your wife? Sometimes, I said, mostly when I forget she's gone. Feels easier that way. And what do you say? Nothing worth repeating. Just that I hope she's warm, wherever she is, that I'm sorry for the things I never said. She nodded. I think they hear us anyway. Maybe. The lamp burned low, and for a long time we sat with only the sound of the fire. She looked at me across the glow, her face calm, unreadable, like the land itself. Clay, she said softly, yes. If you hadn't come to the station that night, would you have gone on alone? I suppose so, I said. A man gets used to the shape of his own shadow. She looked down at her hands. I don't think I could have gone on without you. I wanted to tell her she would have managed, that she was stronger than she knew, but the truth sat heavy between us, the kind that doesn't need arguing. You found me, she said again quieter, and now I have to find what's left of me. You will, I said in my acknowledgement, and if you get lost, the door's open. She met my eyes. That sounds like an invitation. Maybe it is. The lamp flickered, shadows moving across the walls like memory learning to dance again. Outside, the creek whispered beneath the ice, stubborn and alive. Inside, two people waited for the thaw, each wondering if it had already begun. The thaw came slow, as it always does, sneaking in on the souls of days that look no different from the rest. You don't notice it at first. The snow still lies thick, the nights still bite. But the wind loses its edge, and the roof begins to weep in the afternoons. The horses stamp less, the boards of the house sigh softer. One morning you step outside, and somewhere under your boots the earth gives a sound, like a long-held breath being let go. That's how it began. Nora had color in her cheeks again, a small fire that refused to die. She moved about the house without asking, feeding the flame, washing what could be washed, singing low under her breath. The melody had no words, or maybe they'd been lost somewhere on the road. I didn't ask. There are songs that stop being music once you name them. I spent those days fixing what winter had half broken, mending the shed roof, chopping wood that had frozen together in stacks, clearing paths so a body could walk without guessing where the ground began. She'd stand in the doorway sometimes, wrapped in my old coat, hair unbound, watching me work. The sight of her there, the blue of her eyes meeting the pale of the snow, did something quiet inside me I couldn't quite name. It wasn't desire, not in the way a man remembers youth. It was something older, slower, the ache of recognition. Two souls battered into the same shape by different storms. That afternoon, she came out with a pan of warm water and a rag. Your hands, she said, they'll split again if you don't let me tend them. I've had worse, I told her. I know, she said, that's the problem. I gave her my hands. She worked in silence, rubbing the salve along the lines of callus and crack. Her touch was firm, practiced, not tender yet, just sure. I could feel the warmth seep through the skin into the places work had forgotten. You ever think about leaving? She asked after a time. Where would I go? There's always somewhere. Not for men like me, I said. I was made for quiet places that don't ask too many questions. She smiled a little. I thought the same once. What changed? I realized running isn't the same as leaving. You can run for years and never move an inch. I looked at her then, at the smudge of light caught in her hair, the way the sun found her despite the dirt on the window. "You plan to keep running?" "I plan to rest," she said, "for a while." She finished with my hands and sat back on her heels, wiping the rag clean. "There," she said, "you look almost human." "That's a promotion." "Don't get used to it." We laughed, and it sounded right, like the kind of sound a house hadn't heard in too long. By dusk the clouds began to break, showing strips of sky the color of tin cooled after a forge. I saddled the horse and took a short ride down to the ridge. The world had turned to glass and silver, rivers of meltwater running under the snow like veins under skin. Smoke rose from the chimney when I looked back. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to chase it away with distance. When I came home, Nora had laid the table. A stew simmered on the stove. Beans, salt pork, whatever else she coaxed from the pantry. The smell of it filled the room. She looked up as I stepped inside. "You ride far?" "Just enough to remember I still can." "Find anything worth seeing?" "Found the world still there," I said, "and that's plenty." We ate slow. Conversation came easier now. Small bits of memory traded like tokens. She told me about the hospital in St. Louis, about the rows of cots and the smell of carbolic and hope, about a boy who lost a leg and used to draw pictures of horses on scrap paper, swearing he'd ride again someday. I told her about Sarah and the creek that ran red one spring from clay dust, about a colt born during a thunderstorm that never learned to fear lightning. When the meal was done, she said, "There's a kindness in the way you talk about her." "There's no other way left to talk about her," I said. "Does you love her more than the land?" I thought they were the same thing. She nodded, eyes soft but sharp. "And now I think the land doesn't love anyone. It just lets us stay until we've learned our lesson." She smiled faintly. "And what lesson is that?" "That we're temporary, and that's what makes us beautiful." She sat back, quiet for a long while, then said, "Maybe that's why you found me. To remind yourself there's still something worth tending." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it was to remind myself I can still lose something again." Her gaze held mine then, steady as the horizon. "Don't start borrowing sorrow, Clay. There's enough of it waiting for all of us." The room felt smaller with the lamp turned low, the kind of small that keeps you honest. I leaned back, listening to the soft pop of the fire, the faint hum of her tune returning. "You sing when you're thinking," I said. "I sing when I'm trying not to," she said. "What's it about?" "Once it was about saving people. Now it's about forgiving myself for not saving everyone." Sounds heavy. It gets lighter when I say it out loud. We sat with that truth until the lamp began to sputter. I stood to trim the wick, and in the silence she said, "You know, there's something about this place. It feels like it's waiting for something to grow." "Everything's waiting for something," I said. "Most of us just don't know what." She smiled, but her eyes were far away. "Maybe we'll find out together." I banked the fire, set the pot aside, and leaned against the mantel. The snow outside glowed faintly in the moonlight. Inside, the shadows found soft corners. She rose then, the quilt wrapped around her shoulders, and for a heartbeat, she looked like a woman I'd known all my life, though I couldn't have told you from where. She met my eyes, hesitated, and then said, "Good night, Clay." "Good night, Nora." When her door closed, the sound left a small echo in the house, like a word half whispered to God. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening to the wind scratch at the eaves, the slow rhythm of the world deciding to forgive itself. I poured one last cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the moon slide behind a cloud. Somewhere in the dark, I could hear water moving again, a soft trickle under the ice. Life, patient and sure, refusing to be buried. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the last man on earth. The day stretched longer after that. Morning would find its way into the cracks of the house before I woke, and by the time the first coffee boiled, the sky had already forgotten how to be cruel. The road to town began showing its bones again, strips of dirt and rock poking through the melting snow. Spring was close enough to smell, but still too shy to touch. Nora spent her hours mending what could be mended. Curtains, shirts, her satchel strap. I worked the corral fence, whistling to the gelding, who taken to following me like a stubborn friend. There was a rhythm to it all now, a slow, honest rhythm. Two lives that had learned to circle the same quiet. One afternoon, I came in with sawdust on my coat and found her standing by the shelf with a handful of my books. She held them like they were relics. "You read poetry," she said, a half accusation, half surprise. "Sometimes," I said, "when I forget how to talk plain." "Which ones?" "Mostly the ones that sound like they were written by a man who's already tired, Wotawa." She smiled. "Then you'd like this one." She read aloud from a small, tattered collection she carried. Her voice was steady, low, the kind that turns words into breath instead of sound. When she finished, I said, "Sounds like someone who loved the wrong person just long enough to make it count." She closed the book. "Maybe that's the only kind of love that ever counts." I didn't have an answer for that. That evening, the thaw turned the creek loud again. We opened the door just to listen. The sound was wild and alive, like something waking from a long dream. "It's strange," she said, "how the same water that freezes you can sing you back to life." "Most things worth loving do both," I said. She looked at me then, not quick, not shy, just steady. And I felt the world tilt in that small, quiet way it does when it's trying to hand you back something you thought was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fire had burned down low, and I watched the shadows move across the ceiling like they were tracing the past. I thought about Sarah, the way she used to hum when she was happy. I thought about Nora, her hair falling into her eyes when she worked. For the first time, the two memories didn't fight each other. They just sat side by side, nodding like old friends. Sometime before dawn, I heard soft footsteps. Nora stood by the door, wrapped in the blanket, eyes half-shadowed. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Storm in your head, too?" I asked. She nodded. "It's quieter when someone's awake with you." "Sit," I said, motioning to the chair. She sat. For a long while, we didn't talk. Just the creak of wood and the whisper of the fire. Then she said, "Do you ever feel guilty for wanting to live again?" "All the time," I said. "Feels like betraying the dead, but maybe the dead don't mind." "I think they want us to," she said. "Otherwise, what was the point of surviving?" Her words settled heavy, not like a burden, but like a truth finding its place. She looked at the apple branch I'd brought inside to keep from freezing. Its bark was dry, but a small green bud had started to show near the tip. "You think it'll bloom?" she asked. "If it's stubborn enough," I said. She smiled at that, and her hand brushed mine where it rested on the table. Just that, a touch light as breath, but enough to undo something that had been tied too tight inside me for years. Yeah, neither of us pulled away. The lamp flickered. The snow outside whispered its last secrets into the night. She said, "Clay, I keep wondering why you stopped leaving things behind." "Because everything I left stayed gone," I said. "Figured I'd stop trying to outrun the ghosts and see if they'd sit a while." She nodded, eyes tracing my face like a map she meant to learn by heart. "And did they?" "Some," I said. "The rest went quiet." "That's close enough to peace for me." The fire cracked, sending up a soft shower of sparks. She leaned her head back against the chair, eyelids heavy. "If you keep talking like that," she said, "I might start believing this world isn't all bad." "It's half bad," I said, "but the other half, well, that's why we keep getting up." She smiled, eyes closed. "That's a preacher's answer again." "Maybe," I said, "but I mean it." She fell asleep right there, chin tilted toward the light. I sat watching her breathe, the rise and fall steady as the rhythm of an old horse on a long trail. I thought about the strange mercy of it all, that I'd gone to the station for feed and found a reason to start speaking in full sentences again. Outside, the snow melt trickled louder, a creek remembering how to be wild. I banked the fire low and whispered, not to her but to the dark around us, "You did good, Sarah. She's safe." It felt right to say it out loud. When I finally lay down on the floor, the house breathing quiet around us, I realized I wasn't waiting for sleep. I was just listening to the sound of life returning, slow and sure. And in that moment, I knew spring had already begun. Spring arrived without fanfare, no trumpet of birds, no riot of color, just the steady work of thaw and light. Snow pulled back from the fence posts, the creek found its voice again, and mud took its rightful place at every threshold. Out here spring doesn't bloom, it seeps in, the way forgiveness does. We moved through the days like folks learning how to live with weather instead of fighting it. Nora cleaned the shed and found things I had forgotten I owned. A pair of gloves gone stiff with age, a tin of nails, Sarah's old bonnet folded between two grain sacks. She brought it inside and laid it on the table. "Yours?" she asked. "It was hers," I said. "She wore it the day we planted that apple tree." Nora brushed a finger across the fabric. "She had small hands," she said softly. "Small hands," I agreed, "but they carried half this valley." We let silence do the rest of the talking. She set the bonnet carefully on the shelf near the window, where the morning light could find it. I didn't tell her, but that small act felt like a kind of grace. Some memories deserve to be seen, not hidden. That afternoon, I hitched the wagon. The path to town was open again. More mud than road, but a man could make it if he didn't mind getting stuck once or twice. Nora packed a small parcel, bread, a note, and the letter she'd written to the widow. Her handwriting was neat, but hesitant, like someone learning how to speak again. "You sure you don't want me to ride with you?" she asked. "Best I go alone," I said. "Roads mean yet? Besides, someone ought to keep the fire company." She smiled. "Don't let the town talk you into staying." "Town's never offered me that courtesy." She laughed, that warm, sudden sound that felt like sunlight breaking through old cloud. I rode out before noon. The trip took most of the day. The world looked new and tired at once. Fields patched with snow, cattle nosing at the first green shoots, mountains still hiding under white caps that refused to melt. When I reached town, the folks there looked the same as they always did, men in coats that had seen too many seasons, women carrying gossip like it might feed them. I handed the letter to the station agent, an old friend named Hale, who still chewed his words like tobacco. "You found her then?" he asked. "Found her," I said, alive and stubborn. He nodded, slid the letter into the outgoing mailbag. "That nurse has got grit. The widow will be glad for the word." He studied me a moment. "You look better, Clay. Like the world stopped biting for a while." "Maybe it just ran out of teeth," I said. He chuckled. "Well, don't get used to peace. It's a scarce thing round here." I bought coffee, flour, a bit of salt, and a spool of thread she'd asked for. The shopkeeper's wife wrapped it all neat, her eyes curious but kind. "We heard you took someone in during the storm," she said. "Isn't that true?" "It's true." "Good of you," she said. "World needs that kind of good mart. I know. I didn't know what to say, so I tipped my hat and left it at that. By the time I started back, the sun had already ducked behind the ridge, painting the world in copper and blue. The road home was quiet, except for the creak of the wagon and the cry of one hawk tracing lazy circles above. I thought about Sarah, about how she used to say, "No one owns the land. They just borrow its silence." I thought about Nora, waiting by the fire, her hands probably busy with something simple that made the house breathe again. When I reached the cabin, the windows glowed warm. I heard the faint sound of humming before I even stepped down. She opened the door before I could knock. "You're late," she said. Road kept arguing. "Did you win?" "Call it a draw." She smiled, took the sack from my hands. "Smells like town." "That bad?" "That familiar," she said, and set the bundle down. "Did the letter go?" "Gone north by morning." "Good." She exhaled. "Maybe that means something will reach the people who still need it." We sat by the fire and shared what passed for supper. When I told her what Hale had said, that the world needs that kind of good, she looked away, shaking her head. "It wasn't goodness," she said. "It was luck. You happened to be there." "Maybe," I said. "But sometimes luck's just what good people call each other when they don't want to feel holy." She looked at me then, eyes bright in the lamplight. "You ever think you talk like a man twice your age?" "I feel like one most days." She laughed quietly. "You sound like one all the rest." After we ate, she took out the little green bud I'd given her from the apple branch. She planted it in a tin cup filled with soil scraped from the yard. "It's still holding on," she said. I leaned closer. The bud was tiny, fragile, a whisper of color against the dark earth. "Doesn't know it's got no business growing indoors," I said. She smiled. "Maybe that's why it will." We sat watching that small piece of green as though it were a miracle, and maybe it was. The fire burned down to embers, the lamp flickered, and the sound of the creek outside filled the pauses between our breaths. "Clay," she said after a while. If the letter brings another call for help, if someone else needs me, I might have to go." I felt the words like a stone dropped in still water. "You should," I said. "That's who you are." She nodded slow. "And if I stay, then that's who you are too." She looked at me for a long moment. "Would you want me to?" I stared into the fire, the flames drawing long shadows across the walls. "Wanting's easy," I said. "It's asking that takes courage." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was soft, nearly lost in the crackle. "Then maybe we'll both learn courage at the same pace." The fire sighed, the creek sang, and the wind outside settled into something that sounded almost like peace. That night, I dreamed of spring again. Not the kind that bursts into flowers, but the kind that just quietly stays. The apple tree was the first to wake. Its branches had stood all winter like prayer, brittle and bare, but by mid-April there were buds, small, defiant, the color of promise. I found myself walking out to it every morning, coffee in hand, pretending to check the fence or the shed when all I wanted was to see if life still remembered us. Nora followed me one morning, a shawl around her shoulders, hair braided loose. She knelt beside the roots, brushed the soil with her fingers. "It's coming back," she said as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Everything does, given enough quiet," I said. She looked up at me. "Do you really believe that?" "I believe in trying," I said. "Belief's just a word for not quitting." She smiled, half sorrow, half warmth. "Then you're a believer, whether you admit it or not." We stood there a while longer, watching sunlight sift through the branches. When we went inside, she brewed coffee strong enough to wake the house, and we sat at the table without hurry. The days had settled into something almost tender. In the afternoons, she'd walk down to the creek, gathering herbs and roots she recognized. I'd work the fence or mend tack, but my eyes always found her. She moved through the field like someone being reintroduced to the world, cautious, grateful. Once I caught her laughing at a bird splashing in a puddle, a real laugh that made the years between us dissolve. That night, she told me about the boy she once saved in a field hospital, the one who used to sketch horses. "He never got to ride again," she said, "but he sent me a drawing after he went home. A horse, standing in the rain, not moving, not waiting, just being." "What happened to the drawing?" I asked. "I left it behind when I left the city. Maybe I thought leaving everything would make it easier." "And did it?" She shook her head. "No. Turns out leaving doesn't heal anything. Staying does." Her eyes met mine then, and I felt something shift, quiet but sure, like a gate swinging open in the wind. A week later, I took her into town for the first time. The valley was green at the edges now, the road soft but passable. Folks looked at her with that mix of curiosity and kindness small towns keep in equal measure. She handled it better than I did, smiling, thanking, nodding when people whispered her name. We stopped by the mercantile, where Mrs. Hale fussed over her like an old hen. "You'll have him eating better now," she said, nudging me with her elbow. "Maybe you'll civilize him while you're at it." Nora laughed light and easy. "He's doing just fine. Maybe I'll learn to keep up with him." The words shouldn't have meant much, but they settled somewhere deep. On the way home, she was quiet, watching the land roll past. "They think we're married," she said finally. "Does that bother you? Does it bother you?" "Not unless you mind the company." She smiled at that, looked out at the horizon again. "Maybe I don't." Back home, the day folded into gold. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. She stood on the porch while I unharnessed the horse, and when I came up the steps, she said, "You ever think about building something bigger than this? Bigger? A place where people could come, not just you and me. A place for the sick, the lost, the tired. Out here there's no doctor for miles. I rubbed the back of my neck. I'm no doctor. You don't have to be, she said. You built a home out of nothing. That's harder. I looked at her, the wind moving a strand of hair across her face. She didn't brush it away. You really think folks would come? I asked. They will, she said, if we keep the door open. That night, we talked long after the lamps went out, about rooms and beds and a shelf for medicine, about how hope needs walls to keep it warm. She spoke with her hands, sketching the shape of a building in the air, eyes bright with purpose. I hadn't seen her look that alive since the day she first smiled without flinching. When she finally fell silent, she looked at me and said, "You'd help me, wouldn't you?" "I'd help," I said, "though you might have to remind me what helping looks like." "It looks like what you did the night you found me," she said. "You showed up." I sat with that a long time after she'd gone to bed. The fire burned low, the apple tree's shadow stretching across the yard through the window. The idea of a clinic, our clinic, felt strange and right all at once. I wasn't sure if it was her dream or ours, but maybe that didn't matter. In the days that followed, we started small, cleared the shed, patched its roof, scrubbed the walls until the wood breathed again. She lined up her bottles and instruments on a makeshift shelf, humming as she worked. "We'll call it the Bennett Clinic," she said once, almost shyly. "After both of us." "After you," and I said, "You're the healer." She shook her head. "No, Clay. You were the first one who remembered what healing looked like." The words caught me off guard. I turned away, pretending to fix the latch, but my throat burned with a feeling I thought was long dead. That evening, the first patient arrived, a ranch hand with a gash on his forearm. He'd heard from a neighbor there was a nurse living out by the Bennett place. Nora cleaned the wound, stitched it steady, and wrapped it neat. When the man left, he said, "Didn't figure anyone cared enough to patch up the likes of me." "Everyone deserves mending," she said. I watched her wash her hands afterward, her movements quiet, sure, and something in me gave way. It wasn't love like thunder or wildfire. It was love like spring, soft, stubborn, and unstoppable. That night, after she'd gone to her room, I stepped outside. The air was cool, the stars bright enough to make a man believe again. The apple tree rustled, and a petal, just one, had opened under the moonlight. I thought of Sarah, of Nora, of all the winters behind me, and I whispered, "All right, I'll stay." The wind moved through the branches, a sound like a woman laughing far away. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it wasn't. By summer, the Bennett place had turned into something I could hardly recognize. The fields wore green again. The air held the scent of sage and sun-warmed soil, and the clinic stood proud where the shed once leaned, new boards bright against the old. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a porch wide enough for a man to think on, but it had her mark on every inch of it. Curtains cut from flour sacks, shelves lined with bottles she'd cleaned and labeled in her fine hand. The kind of order that says, someone believes in tomorrow. People began coming from farther valleys, wives with children, old ranchers with coughs that had lingered since spring, drifters nursing broken bones or worse. They came quiet, the way folks do when they aren't used to kindness. She met them with that calm of hers, that mix of iron and mercy. I'd stand back, handing her what she asked for, watching the fear drain out of faces that had forgotten how to rest. One night, after she'd seen her last patient, I found her sitting on the porch, hair loose, hands folded around a mug gone cold. The light from the door fell over her shoulders, turning the dust in the air to gold. "You've built something good," I said. She corrected. "We built it." I sat beside her. The cicadas sang their restless hymn in the dark, and the moon hung low, fat and forgiving. "Do you ever miss the city?" I asked. She shook her head. "I miss the sound of trains," she said, "not because they took me anywhere worth going, but because they reminded me there was still somewhere to go." She looked over at me, eyes catching the lamplight. "Do you ever miss her?" "Every day," I said, "but not the same way anymore. It's like the pain got tired of being sharp." She nodded, her thumb tracing the rim of the cup. "Maybe that's what healing really is. The hurt stays, but it stops cutting." We sat there a while longer, saying nothing. The night didn't need our words. It had enough of its own. In the weeks that followed, we grew into our new life the way vines learn a fence. Slow, deliberate, without noticing. She'd leave early for the clinic, and I'd trail behind with repairs or supplies, listening to her hum. Some evenings we'd ride out beyond the ridge, where the prairie rolled unbroken to the horizon. She liked to stop where the grass grew high and wild. "I used to think the world was too big for one heart," she said once. "Now I think a heart just has to grow big enough for the world." "Think mine's up to it?" I asked. "It's already started," she said. And maybe she was right, because that summer, something in me gave way. The part that waited for sorrow to knock again. I started laughing without guilt, sleeping through the nights, finding joy in small things, the way the clinic smelled of herbs and soap, the way her shadow stretched beside mine at sunset, the way she said my name like it had been waiting all its life to be said that way. The apple tree bloomed early that year. White petals fell like quiet snow over the yard. She tied ribbons to its branches for the patients who'd recovered, one for each person she'd helped. "Hope should be visible," she said. One evening, a boy we'd treated, barely 12, all elbows and gratitude, brought a painter from town. He said the clinic story deserved to be told. The man sketched us, standing by the porch, the apple tree behind us, petals falling. We didn't pose. We just stood the way we always did, her with her hands clasped, me with my hat low, both of us watching the sun settle into the hills. Years later, they tell me that painting hung in the county hall for a time, though I never went to see it. Didn't need to. The real thing was still here, the tree, the porch, her laughter drifting through the open window. I don't remember the day I realized I'd stopped counting winters. Maybe it was when the clinic sign began to fade from sun and rain, or when I caught myself talking about next year without thinking it was a lie. Time just kept moving, and for once I let it. Nora stayed. The letter north brought a reply, a thank you from the widow, and an invitation she never took. "I'm needed here," she said simply, and that was that. One autumn evening, as the leaves turned copper and the air thinned, we sat by the fire, and she said, "Clay, do you ever think about what all this means, what it's for?" I looked around the room. The shelves lined with her jars, the window glowing with lamplight, the faint outline of the tree outside. "I think it means we didn't waste our second chance," I said. She smiled at that, slow and sure. "No," she said, "we didn't." I reached for her hand. It was small, steady, and warm against mine. The kind of hand that doesn't pull you out of the dark, but walks beside you until the dark isn't so heavy. Outside, the wind moved through the orchard, carrying the scent of apples and rain. The night was kind, the way nights get when they know they've done their part. If you ever pass through this valley, you might still see the place. The Bennett Clinic, the apple tree by the porch, the fence line running straight as memory. Folks say a nurse and a cowboy once lived there, healing whoever came their way. But I know better. We weren't just healing others. We were healing ourselves, one small kindness at a time. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, you can still hear her humming.